Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. I am so excited tonight to bring you everyone Mr. Timothy Zahn, who
Hello.
has been writing this lovely series here, Thrawn Ascendancy. We're here tonight for his third book and the final in the trilogy, Lesser Evil. Joining us tonight is Timothy Zahn's editor at Del Rey Books, Tom Hoeler. For those of you who may be tuning in for the first time and learning about Timothy Zahn, he is the author of more than 60 novels, my goodness, nearly 90 short stories and novelettes, and 4 short fiction collections. He has also won a Hugo Award for Best Novella. Now, in this one, Zahn is on a mission to hopefully save. I lost my notes. I apologize for everyone. is Zahn willing to sacrifice everything to save the ascendancy? And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and blip out of the screen. But before I go, a little bit of house cleaning. Everyone, if you're going to be asking questions, don't pose the questions in the chat. Make sure you hit below the button that says ask a question. A bunch of you already found that. We have 19 questions so far. If you want any questions that should be answered, go ahead and hit that. I do apologize if we don't get to your questions, just because there are so many of them. And finally, if you haven't already, please go ahead and purchase this awesome book here. We have down below a green button that says purchase the book. You'll get a signed book plate from Mr. Timothy Zahn himself. And without further ado, I'm going to disappear. See you later.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And hello, Tim. How are you doing?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm really excited that we get to do this for the third time. You know, we did this for Chaos Rising. We did it for Greater Good. And now we get to do it for Lesser Evil, which comes out tomorrow, which is it's ridiculous that it comes out tomorrow. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But before we get started, I just want to make 2 kind of quick little announcements for everybody. Thank everyone for joining us. I know that there are actually a bunch of people like all over the world, in Germany, in the Ukraine, in time zones near and far. So whether you stayed up super late, you got up super early, or anywhere in between, thank you so much for coming to spend time with us tonight. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate the sacrificed hours of sleep. But 2 notes before we get started. First is a note about spoilers, which we always do. Obviously, the book releases in 4 hours. No, math. Yep, 4 hours, less than 4 hours. So we're not going to spoil the entire book. We are definitely going to talk about some characters, the themes, events, other aspects of the book. We're going to probably hit on things that were released as excerpts. And we're absolutely going to talk about characters and things from the other 2 books that have led us all the way here. But don't worry, there's absolutely going to be plenty of the story for you to discover on your own. The book's over 500 pages long. The audiobook's 23 hours long. Trust me, we could not, even if we wanted to, tell you everything that happened in this book tonight. Second, during the chat, we are actually going to answer some of your questions. So, you know, as noted, you can leave them in the Ask a Question. We got a bunch submitted beforehand as well, so we're going to try to answer as many as we can. And again, I appreciate everyone sending some questions. Made my job a little bit easier, which is always good. So, Tim, if you're ready, I am ready.
I'm ready.
Get going. Okay. So the last time that we had a conversation like this, we were talking about Greater Good, and it was spring of this year, surprising enough. And so we were talking about the middle of a trilogy. Now we're here to talk about the grand finale, the end of a trilogy. It's 540 pages long. Now that the whole trilogy is done, and it's, for all intents and purposes, all out there, what are your sort of overall thoughts on the trilogy coming to an end?
It's been a fun ride for me. I'm hoping it's a fun ride for everybody else. This is the first Star Wars trilogy I've been given since the Thrawn trilogy back in the early 1990s. All the other books have been essentially standalone, or contracted at least standalone. This has given me, when you've got 3 books, you can create characters and make full character arcs, plot threads that will not end in the first book or the second, but will find their conclusion in the third. So that's one reason Lesser Evil is so long, is we have all of these things to wrap up, to bring to a satisfying conclusion, and just hopefully leave the readers with, that was a fun ride. I liked these characters. I hope to see more of them in the future.
Does writing, I mean, well, not does, I know it does. How does writing the end of the trilogy kind of differ from writing the first two books? Do you find the trilogy easier or harder to write than the other books when you're writing a series?
I've just, hopefully I have at least the vague idea of where each plot thread will go. Sometimes those change along the way, but I know what the plot threads are. I know which ones we're going to set up fresh in the third book, and knowing whether they're all out there. I've got characters who are established. In some ways it's easier because a lot of the background is already set up, and the background for the reader, we know something about the ascendancy. The politics will make as much sense as just politics make for anybody. And so the background is set, and I just have to remember that everybody needs their ending.
We're going to talk about not quite the endings that everyone gets, but we're going to talk about where people are headed when we get into this book in a few minutes. I guess related to that, then, do you have a favorite when it comes to?
Wait a minute. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Second, please. Second.
No problem. Everyone bear with us just a second. Weird, funky. All right.
Can you hear me?
We still have an echo. Maybe our friends at Mysterious Galaxy can help out for a second.
Hello. So I'm going to go ahead and mute you for a short second, sir. It looks like you might need to get some headphones, because your microphone is bleeding in, or the speakers are causing an echo with your microphone. So I currently have you muted, just so you know, until we get that resolved.
Communication interruption means only one thing when it comes to Star Wars. Anyway.
Oh, no.
Everyone hang on just a moment. We'll be back to Tim in just
Where's
a second.
the tractor beam?
Yes. So
glitches happen sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Well, while we get this all sorted.
Oh, wait a minute. There's no hit.
Oh.
Okay.
No.
Mm-hmm.
How is this working?
That's
perfect.
Good.
Much better.
Can you hear me, Tim?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're in a well.
Right. All right. I'm in a well.
Now
awesome.
I'm getting myself on delay.
Oh, that's strange.
You maybe just have to live with that.
What, Anna?
You may have to live with a delay.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna have to live with that.
Well, you look good on my end, so just know that I think everyone else is getting perfect video without delay. Yep. Okay, cool. I'll jump back on.
Okay. we will soldier on. Thanks everybody for bearing with us. Okay, so
just a second. You've lost.
Sure.
I don't hear him now.
Okay. Oh, you don't hear me now. All right. Well.
All right. Let's continue. I think we've got
okay. Great. All right. So let me double back to where we were a moment before that the interruption, which is, of the three books when you're writing a trilogy, do you have a favorite? Do you enjoy writing the first one versus the third one versus the second one, or does it not really matter for you?
It's essentially a single story in 3 volumes. So I don't see much difference except in where I am in that story.
That makes sense. So something we talked about last time, and it occurred to me in thinking about the finale of a trilogy that this would be really apt. We talked about how, when it comes to building out the world, we don't always fill in or answer every little question or detail about everything until we have to. You referred to it, the idea of is not uncovering or not filling in the entire map until it's absolutely necessary to give you that flexibility. And I was thinking about the end of the trilogy, and my guess is that kind of cautious approach probably pays off the best at the end of a series right? Once you kind of know where everything needs to go, that's probably where it's most essential. Is that, would that be correct?
Yeah.
Speaking of, you mentioned in another interview when you were talking about world building for the Ascendancy or world building in general, this idea of doing, and I thought this was so cool, you called it the idea of consequence testing. If a culture or a system has, X aspect to it, why consequence might that cause for it? Good, bad, or the otherwise. Consequence doesn't always have to be bad. So for the Ascendancy trilogy and in building out these books, can you give me an example of a sort of aspect consequence pairing you found that was particularly interesting or maybe unexpected for you?
Oh, yeah, there's an easy one. When I was working on this third book, one of the things that occurred to me, it was already set up into it, but I hadn't really thought about it through. In the United States, the military is under civilian command, specifically the president. In the Chiss Ascendancy, because the civilians, the Syndicure and such, are all kind of always in an ebb and flow, you definitely do not want the military under their command. So the military is isolated from civilian control. And again, that was something I'd already set up, but it didn't occur consciously to me until I was working through Lesser Evil.
Yeah, that's definitely something that the readers will find has very specific consequences over the course of this book. So I could see what you mean by that. Another thing about this book is it is chock-a-block full of secrets and revelations, which is not to be unexpected for the end of a series. But this book in particular, in fact, dear readers, you're going to learn that some things that you were told in book 1 and book 2 may not entirely have been true, or at least were not the whole truth. And so as a writer,
from a certain point of view.
From certain points of view, yes. And we will get into whose points of view those are. But as a writer, what do you think is like the most key to pulling off a good secret or a good twist during a series to actually make it meaningful and impactful?
You always have to play fair with the reader. You have to set up what's going to be there, or you carefully avoid saying things that you don't want them to know. You can misdirect, you can fudge things, you can have unreliable narrators, but they have to be have to be able to go back and read the book or the trilogy a second time and see where those setups or the gaps or those misdirections were. Once they are able to do that, then they can agree that I'm playing fair with them.
Yeah, I mean, and that also too, it builds a kind of really interesting rereadability into a book or a series, because you go back and like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that then? And the point was, you kind of maybe weren't supposed to see it then. So you weren't supposed to know that you were being, let's say, you were not given all of the puzzle pieces at the time.
I've always liked books that are different the second time you read it, because you see the foreshadowings, you see all of those little things going by.
Exactly. You want to reward people who commit to going back and rereading a story that they may already know where the story is going, but now they have a greater appreciation for how you got there. So to pull back the curtain just ever so slightly, and I think most people probably know this broadly, you and I were not always meant to be sitting here in November 2021 talking about this book just a scant 6.5 months after we published the second book. But even before we published Greater Good in April, I came to you and I said, hey, Tim, what do you think about publishing Lesser Evil this year as well? So what was your first thought when I asked you about that?
The very first thought was, okay, what's going on at Del Rey Publishing? The assumption is always some other books somehow didn't make it into the stack and we're having to scramble, put mine back in. I have no idea still what happened on all of this. What we do have is that an entire trilogy is out in 15 months, which is pretty unusual.
That's pretty unusual, particularly an entire trilogy that's this long. That you know, there's this sort of robust and deep. I will tell you, the very first time that it was floated to me of, hey Tom, do you think we could publish both books in 1 year? That I very professionally said, oh, you know, that's something we can investigate, but was absolutely screaming on the inside. But I knew ultimately that we would be able to pull it off, and pull it off we did. So you know, that's a feather in the cap for you and I.
Yes. I think they should pay us more.
Yeah, you know what? We're gonna float that one up the chain.
You'll get back to that.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We're gonna dig a little deeper into the series in just a minute, but we're gonna ask the first of some fan questions. Unfortunately, I can't credit this one to any one individual, but it was sent to me by a bunch of people, which is that they were curious about, and it goes back to the idea of world building. Do you have a specific process behind coming up with new words in the Chiss language, in Chuna? Is there an existing language that you draw influence from? I know you've talked about the development behind some of the other languages that you used in Star Wars book before, but anything specific to the Chiss language?
Actually, I'm not sure you ever see Chiss language. In these books, it's all the trade language, Menasiat, Mon Miskolf, and all. For those, sometimes I will look up words in different dictionaries, or I will write out a shortened sentence and then shift the consonants and vowels and see if something coherent and pronounceable comes up. Other times it's just what combination of letters sounds good right here.
That makes sense. And you know what, to be honest, we kind of have a default with a lot of Star Wars things where if it sounds good, if it sounds right, if it sounds like it works, then you know what, that's maybe the best thing. That happens for everything: naming creatures, naming planets, naming people, in words for different languages. Naming animals, people, whatever. My first step is come up with options and then go see in Wikipedia if it's been used before. Yes. How many times have we used this name before? Is definitely something we have to fact check in here and there. Speaking of words and letters and things like that, let's talk about the three most mysterious letters in this entire trilogy, ODO. So again, I want to assure everyone that by the time you read the totality of Lesser Evil, you are going to finally have the explanation behind what those letters mean and how Thrawn came to add them to his name. So what I want to ask you is, when did you come up with the idea of decoupling those three letters from the rest of his name and creating an added sort of, we'll call it a designation, without, of course, spoiling what the designation is?
This was something we came up with midway into Chaos Rising. You may remember me pitching that to you, that in the memories, he would be Mithra Nuru, and in the main plot, Mithra Nuru Odu. And I didn't have an idea then what exactly it would be, but I wanted to see how many of the readers caught it and leave it as something, hey, we got 2 books to figure this out. We'll come up with something cool.
Well, I can tell you that everybody noticed it the exact first time we released anything. I think in part because a few people thought it might be a typo. And, folks are great about noticing typos, which is always helpful.
Well, but, fortunately, there were enough. We made sure there are enough mentions that it's either a huge typo or we did it on purpose.
Exactly. And I'll actually tell you that, we released the very first excerpt we released for Lesser Evil is, of course, that memory of Thrawn and Thras meeting at the myth celebration and them talking about some of the art in the room. And I had forgotten that the ODO letters make an appearance in that memory, not exactly in the same form we've seen them. And I was like, oh man, everyone's gonna be really excited. You know, Thras, here's to reveal the memory character. We have this pivotal meeting between two characters. And the number of people who were like, yeah, that's great and all, but more ODO clues. So safe to say that you captured the reader's attention with ODO. And hopefully I think everyone is gonna really dig what the reasoning behind ODO is.
I hope so. I think it's internally consistent with the story we've set up, and just hope that it'll be satisfying there.
I think so. And again, it'll be one of those things that once you know where it came from and how he got it and what it means, that when you go back and look at the sections of the previous books where he has it versus he doesn't, it'll give you a new understanding as to that point in Thrawn's life. I'm trying to be very cryptic. So one more question, and then we're going to dig into kind of the meat of the book itself, which is, you know, obviously from the beginning, the trilogy has been a multi-POV series. But obviously by the time we reach Lesser Evil, we have, you know, not quite a cast of thousands, but getting there. So I'm curious, what does your process look like to keep track of all of them as you're developing the plot for Lesser Evil and deciding who gets to be a POV character and when? Do you have any special processes or techniques that you use to kind of organize all of that as you're writing?
It's largely a matter of I'm going chronologically through the story, except for the little bits at the beginning of Lesser Evil where they're overlapping the end of Greater Good. But I run it chronologically and just keep track of who is where and who is going to be the next protagonist or point of view character, who is likely to get shot at or something of that sort, intertwining them with what the bad guys are doing. And as for who I choose to be POVs, it's a matter of different perspectives. Aralani sees Thrawn and the Ascendancy differently than Roscoe or Samacro or Thalias or Thurfian or any of the others. It's I want the contrast of people who are focused on the Ascendancy, focused on the military, focused on their family, focused on their own careers, and just make contrast with all of those against the background of the story that we've told.
That makes sense. I will tell everyone that I had a jumbled mess of notes tracking individual characters and POVs and tracking things like how many chapters has it been since like we had this POV, just to see, oh my God, we've spent too much time away from a character that haven't appeared. We need to signpost things. So I was just curious if you had similar things. But it's, you know, it's fun to keep track of. It's fun to kind of
try to keep them in some kind of pattern of, as you say, not too many chapters between this person's appearance. But sometimes that's not possible.
That makes sense. Yeah, there are certainly going to be moments. I think a good example is that, you know, we have an Arlani chapter around just under 2/3 of the way through Greater Good. And then we don't have really any more Arlani chapters until the end of that book, for some very specific reasons for how that book is progressing. Yes. So yeah, sometimes it makes sense that we have to have time away. So now we're going to start to dive in to talk a little bit more specifically about the book. And again, we're not going to spoil too much, but we're going to peel back a few more layers. But before we do, I want to ask a question of our listeners. That's right. All of you wonderful people in the chat right now. I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm not going to give you the answer until the very end of our chat. So that means you're going to stick around. Let's face it, you weren't going to leave anyway, but you're going to stick around the whole time. So I'm going to give you 2 questions. And at the end of this, I will give you the answers and we'll see how people guessed. There's no prize for winning. There's no prize for anything. Though I suppose if somebody gets the exact right answer, I should give them a prize. But we'll come to that if we do.
Yeah.
And the question is this. The 2 questions are this. How many apostrophes appear in total in the entire Ascendancy trilogy? Chaos and Rising, Greater Good, and Lesser Evil. How many apostrophes appear in the entire trilogy? And yes, I spent my weekend counting just for you. Second question, sort of like bonus question. Lesser Evil is a big book. It's a long book. How many words is Lesser Evil? How many words? And so, like I said, at the very end of the night, we will answer those questions. And again, I spent my weekend
just a hint,
counting words.
At various appearances over the last couple of months, I've mentioned approximately how many words are in it. So if you were paying attention and at one of those events, you got a leg up on this one.
Yes, a little bit of a help. All right. So everyone can think about that, and we'll come back to it. All right. So the book opens. I'm actually glad that you mentioned this because it makes for a nice segue as we get into to Lesser Evil. The book opens actually prior to the end of Greater Good. We actually have a prologue, and there's one or two other chapters that either take place kind of right between the last chapters of Greater Good or like right alongside in parallel.
Yeah.
And specifically, we open with a prologue that shows Thrawn immediately running into Jixtus, among other people, and we get this interesting encounter sort of by proxy between the two. Why did you want to start the book there? Why did you want to start the book sort of backed up just a little bit from where Greater Good ended?
I wanted to reintroduce Jixtus and Nakar, the dynamic we had set up with him, and run him into Thrawn, so we had an initial meeting between the two of them. And then it couldn't really be done at the end of Greater Good, so we had to kind of put it in here, and as you say, overlap the ending.
I thought that was really interesting. I remember the first time I was reading the manuscript, I was like, wait a minute, when is this taking place? What's going on here? And then I get to about the second or third chapter. I'm like, oh, okay, we haven't gotten to the end of Greater Good yet. And so we squared up a couple tweaks to make that a little clearer. But it made a lot of sense, especially because you sort of maybe don't notice it until after you've read Greater Good. But there is this bit of time gap between the kind of climactic moments and then, Thrawn and Samacro having their meeting with Bakif. So I thought that was an interesting choice, and it's good to hear sort of why you took that approach. This is actually a good time to answer another fan question, and this one I can actually give credit to the person who asked it. Hooray! So Alanis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I'm not. Alanis asked, "Can you give us any insight on what was edited out of the book?" Well, actually, very little was edited out of this book. We always knew it was going to be a very long book. It kind of had to be. At the end of a series, it's not uncommon for the last book in a series to be the longest one. And we always knew we had so many plot elements, so many characters, so many sort of things that we needed to touch on. So not a lot was edited out. We actually added, there was an addition of at least one memory. So the number of memories originally had, we said, we need one more. And it's actually the memory that was released partially today as an excerpt was a memory that was added. And there were some scenes where we kind of rearranged the POV or extended or sort of tweaked things around. But there was not a whole lot that was edited out. Obviously, we do the basic editing stuff of trimming and cutting, kind of creating clarity here and there. But I would say on the whole, in this series, I don't think we actually edit a whole ton out. I can actually only think of maybe one whole scene or so that got quote unquote edited out and that it got combined with another. So very little actually got edited out in this case. We kind of needed it all. And in fact, we needed more than we had.
You did want to take out one chapter, and I had to fight for it.
You did.
I hope you have come to my point of view.
I have. I'm not going to tell anybody what that chapter was.
No, we're not.
But no, I actually having
that's the bonus if they guess the number of apostrophes.
That's true.
We tell them what the scene is.
Yes, but that is true. There was one chapter that I initially was like, I don't know that we need this. I don't know that it makes total space to have here. It's really good. It's a great story beat, but I don't know that it fits in here with everything else. And Tim, you made some very excellent points for why we needed it. And ultimately, yes, I do agree that it's actually, I think the book is better that we kept it. The book is better that we kept it. All right. So now we've moved on from the prologue. And we've got a bunch of questions, and I'm sure people in the chat are already wondering, okay, when are they going to talk about him? When are they going to talk about him? And so we're finally going to talk about him. We've got enough questions without talking about Thras, so let's talk about Thras. Because Thras is finally here. He's been this kind of specter, I guess literally and figuratively, looming over the other two books, because he's mentioned in Chaos Rising and he's mentioned again in Greater Good. Yeah. And now finally he's front and center, not just as someone who is openly referenced, but is a POV character in the POV of our memory chapters. So how did you decide that Thras would be the best person to be the memory character?
Well, from one point of view, he was an important character in Outbound Flight. He was a major Chiss counterpoint to Thrawn. What I wanted him for here is that every other point of view character is either a bad guy, a neutral, or someone Thrawn works with. Part of the military, part of the political establishment. Thras is unique in that he is part of the politics, but not with Thrawn. He has all that connection to the family, but that doesn't affect his relationship with Thrawn. So he is different. He is someone that Thrawn can be almost relaxed with. And it seemed to me this is the person to give this background into Thrawn's life.
That makes a lot of sense. And that was going to be my next question, which is, what about Thrawn are you able to explore Thras that you can't with the other characters? And I think you rightly pointed out his entry into Thrawn's life and the way that they interact is just so different. It's not part of the military like Arlani and all those other characters are. It's not it's part of the same family, but it's not in a sort of like ruling relationship the way that the tensions he has with Thurfian or even Bakif, even though they're not of the same family. And I remember you coming to me because, as some people might know or might have heard, originally we talked about, maybe the memories are just a thing we do in book one, because we had this strong idea of, we're going to have Thrawn memories and it'll be younger Thrawn and back and forth. And then when Greater Good was rolling around, we had a conversation about, do we do this again? And obviously once we did it a second time, we kind of had to do it a third time. And I remember you coming to me and say, what if Thras is the character? And it obviously made perfect sense. Yeah. And I think even if you didn't know it at the time, the work that you did in books 1 and 2 of having Thras be this character who's just looming, who's mentioned a few times, who's sort of teased about, and then suddenly now they're front and center. It ended up working. It was the best bit of happenstance for it to work out that way. Speaking of characters, there's so many characters. And let's talk about some of their character growth and their development. The first character I want to talk about is Thalias. I think it's probably pretty safe to say that aside from Thrawn, there are other arguments to me, but Thalias kind of might be the other, like, quote unquote main character of the series in terms of the depth and the length of their character journey and the kind of drama and change we see from the very first book to here. So tell me about, as we're headed into Lesser Evil, what would you say characterizes the biggest shift between who she was when we first met her in Chaos Rising and who she is when we see her again at the very beginning of Lesser Evil?
Yeah. Well, she started, of course, as a Skywalker who was leaving the profession because she'd lost her third. Then you saw her as, I guess, a wide-eyed, idealistic young woman who is, her goal is to meet this guy who helped her through a bad time and just reestablish relationship with him. And it started there, and it has gradually progressed to where she sees his blind spot. She sees all of the problems, all of the abilities, how he affects people, how he affects the ascendancy, how he is changing history. And she's lost a lot of innocence. she is now a very strong protector of him as to whatever extent she can do. So she has gone from idealistic to fierce protector, and she will do what is necessary to keep him safe.
That she will. The other thing I think you see is just how much she comes into her own in terms of becoming, you mentioned she's sort of in the first book, kind of a wide-eyed young person who's kind of taking in and reacting to the world around them. But I think as you see going through the series, and as people will see in Lesser Evil, Thalius is making some very firm and very active decisions in what what she wants her life to be and what she wants life to be for folks around her. Which is really great and a lot of fun. And if I said anything more about it, I think that people would be spoiled. So we're not going to say anything more.
Good plan.
This was actually not on the question sheet. And after I sent the questions to you, Tim, beforehand, I was like, oh my God, I didn't ask about this character. I need to. So here's a quick but surprise question, which is our friend, maybe not friend, Quiloria the Pathfinder. He finds himself in an interesting predicament going into Lesser Evil because he's got this sort of mission that he received from Jixtus, but also he has now more than once come close and interacted with Thrawn and the Chiss in general, and it's very much the proverbial rock in a hard place. So tell me, between the two, between Jixtus and Thrawn, whom do you think Quirly fears more and why?
Probably Jixtus, because he's right there. He will kill you if he decides to, and he's within range to do it. Thrawn scares Quiloria on a different level entire. A larger scale. If this guy comes after me, everything around me is in trouble. On the other hand, he understands Thrawn's motivations. In fact, he gets it explicitly in one scene, as you will see. And he knows then how to avoid getting into trouble with Thrawn. If he can stay out of trouble or can fulfill that, then he's good, but he may not be able to. By the way, I should mention to people with these headphones, I'm getting an echo of myself here. So if I seem to stumble over sentences, this is really just water. It's I'm just confusing myself.
Well, you sound
good
on our end.
First time we've used this software, and it's not working as well as sometimes.
It sounds good on our end, though. So
Okay.
No worries. All good over here. So for Thrawn, obviously, there's other. Don't worry, we're going to talk about some of the other characters in a minute. But for Thrawn, we all know, obviously, from Thrawn and alliances and treason, his appearance of rebels, we all know that he has a destiny of this journey through the Empire in the lesser galaxy that is in his future. And obviously, we don't really know yet exactly how all that exactly went down and how he gets there, et cetera, et cetera. But broadly, throughout the Ascendancy trilogy, what sorts of skills and lessons do you think that Thrawn himself has learned that are going to inform some of his journey later on as he's working his way through the Empire with, Eli Vanto and his other friends?
Yeah. I think the biggest lesson he's learned here is that he's really terrible at politics. And if he's going to survive a political landscape, he needs friends and allies who can work with him and help him through those blind areas. He's got the tactics, the military stuff down cold, but he needs people around him who can understand the other areas that he can't. And that is something he will find out later on in the Imperial Trilogy, later down in the timeline.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's another good segue to a fan question, which was, if Thrawn had never joined the military, perhaps he'd never been identified by any of the greater ruling families, what do you think he would have become?
I hesitate to say this, but I have to. Possibly the Chiss's first consulting detective, which I believe is how Sherlock Holmes described himself.
It's that's not a bad gig if you can get it. And I think that Thrawn would have been well suited to that particular role. If he had never made his way into the military. Though one wonders that, or one assumes a little bit that given how the Chiss hierarchy in military sort of works, that at some point he probably maybe would have been identified, maybe if not in the same manner that we see, but at some point.
He would probably have been picked up later on, if not that early. Yes, I agree. There are too many families with rivalries in the military area. Somebody would have spotted him. Yeah. And also, no matter who had picked him up, one of the ruling families or great families would have stolen him away eventually.
One also imagines that had he become a consulting detective, that one of the families would have maybe asked to put his skills to use for some sort of nefarious means related to rivalry, and that might have pulled him into one of the ruling families anyway. So this series, and we've talked about a lot of them, has all sorts of evolving themes: identity and individualism, loyalty and duty. And in book 3, these kind of fuse into this sense of personal glory versus family glory. And one of your new characters, I realized that she's not new because she appeared in the series before, but she gets a POV this time, so we're going to refer to her as a new character. But one of your new characters that kind of comes face to face with all of that is Captain Roscoe. So tell us a little bit more about Roscoe, how you developed her, and why you wanted to bring her into Lesser Evil as a full-on POV character with her own arc and story and journey.
I wanted to bring her back. She had locked horns with Thrawn and Aralani early in Chaos Rising, one of the memories. I thought she would be a good character to represent the person to whom family is everything. We had Lakinda realizing in time that the ascendancy is more important than any individual family, even hers. Roscoe has never figured that out or come to that conclusion. She is always going to be Clar first. And I wanted a character who was that way, that passionate for her family, and who would never understand or accept Thrawn, but would always be antagonistic to him. Again, like Thrawn, a unique character, unique point of view to explore.
Definitely. And I think that she's a character too, where I think at first blush, the first chapter that you read with that character, you get an immediate sense of her sort of identity and her sort of conviction. But I think what I'm really excited for readers to see is, I think initially someone said, oh, well, we kind of saw a character like this. We had Lakinta in Greater Good. Okay, this is a similar sort of character. But I think pretty quickly you see that they embody two very different types of characters and two very different sort of thematic journeys. And they relate to Thrawn in two very, very different ways, which is just, it's another great way that we get to explore the dimension around character. And as a little bit of a tease, the cool thing about Roscoe is that she is a character that we get to see interact with Thrawn at multiple points from the timeline, in both the story we're seeing now, but also a connection back to the memories. And so we get another character we get to see have a long-lived sort of interaction, a relationship with Thrawn, which is a lot of fun.
And again, aside from some of the other characters, she never recognizes or accepts the fact that he is a great tactician strategist. She can only see her antagonism to him and where he has defeated her, at least in her own mind. No one else really thinks of him as defeating her here, but she's got that idea, and she's never going to let it go.
Speaking of her sort of journey and what she's willing to let go and what she's willing to accept, I think Roscoe's journey in particular is going to highlight something that we've seen over the course of this series, and obviously it comes to a head in a big way in Lesser Evil, which is the balance of power and the intricacy of the alliances and the rivalries and the relationships among the families of the Ascendancy.
Yeah.
Is that sort of weird, precarious, everything on a knife's edge balance good for the Ascendancy in terms of being a functioning society?
I think it's mostly stable unless it's hit with a brick from the outside, like Jixtus is attempting to do. This is probably coming a little bit, at least, from my experiences in childhood playing Risk. How somebody would get too much power and everybody else would gang up against them until they were beaten down, and then new alliances would form. That was a game we could have family members not speaking to each other for days. But I think some of that is inherent in the CHIS system. You will have alliances that shift back and forth as everybody sees their own advantage. We have a little bit of that in the United States, but truncated because we've got two major parties that are jostling back and forth. If you go to Europe or a lot of other countries where there are multiple parties represented in parliament, you see a little bit more of the alliances jockeying for power, for position. I will support you if you will add this something we like into your party platform. It's just the CHIS go whole hog with this.
Exactly. They go to the moon with it, figuratively and probably literally. I love there's a moment, I'm going to be oblique about it, but there's a moment in the book where there's an event that a family is hosting and somebody is there and they notice that there are a bunch of people from a different family there. And they're like, what are these people doing here? And someone's just like, oh, we just invite them so they can see kind of how cool we are.
Yes.
We invite them so they can see how cool our parties are, even though they're not really invited to be guests. They're just invited to sort of bear witness to our family being cooler than theirs.
Along with all the political machinations, you also have a bunch of posturing. Yes. Exactly. Between the families.
I mean, and maybe no place is that better seen than in that first memory when Thras and Thrawn meet each other. The myth having this extravagant sort of matching ceremony, in part to welcome in the new members, but also to show off and say, look at these cool people that we have brought to our family.
That we have and you don't.
Exactly. Exactly. We have and you don't. And Thrawn even, sort of deduces out that it's a little bit weird that he's involved so quickly, and it seems like he's the jewel prize for that party. But something that a bunch of readers have asked us, and that first memory is a good example of this, is that first memory gives us a look at some CHIS art, and obviously more specifically some myth art. And they were wondering, does CHIS art have any sort of hallmarks or notable features that differentiate it from the art of other cultures? Because we've seen Thrawn look at the art of other cultures and say, oh, I can tell XYZ about the culture. Does CHIS art have any sort of notable kind of homogenous feature that somebody like Thrawn could use if he were to view CHIS art on his own?
Oh, probably. I have no idea what, though. Remember, right. Don't fill in the map?
Exactly. Don't fill in the map. I suppose one would have to know, though, maybe which family's art you were looking at. One would think that family art probably differs in terms of its features and specialties.
The overall, there would be a lot of differences, yes. Thrawn's skill is in seeing the threads that go through everything. The part that is the basic Chiss soul. That's how he finds the ethos of a people, their blind spots, etc. So there's probably some underlying thread that he could pick up that nobody else would.
As he does for that very interesting character that we hear about in the first memory, who has 3 letters that Thrawn also has.
Yeah.
Speaking of characters, one of my favorite things, and I know that the readers really love this, is when we get to look at the dramatis persona for an upcoming Thrawn book and for an Ascendancy book. And so looking at the dramatis persona for Lesser Evil, and looking at that very first scene of the book, we notice when Thrawn and Jixtus cross paths that Jixtus isn't alone. He has a new associate with him, Generalarius Nakir. So tell us a little bit more about who exactly is the Generalarius, and maybe more importantly, because this is now the 3rd book, what separates him from other associates we've seen with Jixtus, Yiv and Hapleaf from the previous novels?
Like all of them, he is a tool of Jixtus. He just doesn't realize it, or thinks he is more important to Jixtus than he really is. Hapleaf knew he was a tool, was okay with that. Yiv thought he was at least a big dog tool, but ultimately Jixtus uses everybody. And it's Nakar realizing slowly what his real place is in Jixtus's universe that provides a lot of the internal tension in his point of view and his worldview as well.
Generalarius represents a really interesting perspective that readers are going to find that is, and we talked about this, I think we talked about this for the Chaos Rising, when we chatted for Chaos Rising, which is this question of, well, what exactly do people who aren't in the Ascendancy and who aren't Chiss, what do they really think about the Chiss? And obviously Jixtus's perspective is very much skewed because he has all these ulterior motives. And over the course of Lesser Evil, I think Nakir gives you a bit of insight into what I'm going to say, quote unquote, normal people, but I mean that sort of more broadly in terms of people who don't necessarily have an immediate agenda against the Chiss, what they think of the Chiss and how they perceive them. And I think it's an interesting viewpoint to see throughout the book. And also, the term Generalarius, we've heard other people with terms similar to that before. Mm-hmm. So perhaps if readers are astute, they will pick up on some similarity.
Yeah, there's a linkage in there. Most people don't think that much of the Chiss. They either don't like them, they're afraid of them. They probably see them as immensely powerful and uncaring about anybody else around them. Arrogant and dismissive, perhaps. So we bring this out a little bit more explicitly in this book near the end, but probably they're just not liked very much.
That seems about right. They probably are not liked very much. It's not a whole lot of examples of interactions with the Chiss being all that cordial. Speaking of dramatis persona, I think I got asked this question prior to this event as much as any other. And so I know that we don't usually fill in the map, but maybe we can fill in just this tiny little corner, which is Wootro, who is, I know, a fan favorite and is definitely the funniest character in the trilogy. Wootro has all the funniest lines in the series. So what is Wootro's favorite family status? Because obviously they never appeared on the dramatis persona.
Mm-hmm. She's probably pretty high up in her family. The Kivu are not, I think they're one of the 40, not one of the 9, but they are allied loosely, I think, with the Dasklo. So she is in a certain position of, let's say, stability not power necessarily, but she's secure in her position. And that allows her to not feel like she's walking in eggshells. She knows who she is. She's got the backing of her family. She's good at her job. She can joke around and not worry about somebody taking offense or slapping her down. Obviously, she has Arlani's confidence. And I think the two of them make a really nice team. And that one scene in particular you're thinking about, I'm hoping readers will laugh out loud at.
I think they will, because it's hilarious, and it just builds on everything we saw with them in the previous two books, and the way that Wootro gets to be the character who can, like, Thrawn is the person who can be honest and blunt with Arlani, and she's not immediately going to toss him out an airlock. Wootro seems to be the person who can be funny with Arlani, and I don't, particularly when they're on duty, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people that Arlani will suffer their comedy, particularly in the middle of like a battle, or when they're trying to get out of, trouble when they're actually on duty. And yet Wootro is kind of able to cut through that a little bit, and provide.
Well, she can snap in an instant from Arlani's captain, second in command, to Arlani's friend. And command personnel are not going to have too many people they can call friends. It's just the position. They have to always have the image, the awareness of their authority. Wootro is able to break that barrier. And I think Arlani is glad she's got somebody like that.
Exactly. Wootro fills a similar role for Arlani that I think we've seen plenty of characters fill for Thrawn, whether it was Pharaoh, whether it was Eli, whether it was Peleon. She fills a very specific sort of role for the character. And I think that makes, obviously, Arlani even better in her command, having someone like Wootro around. And yes, there is one scene in Lesser Evil that I think folks who enjoy the dynamic between Arlani and Wootro are going to find extraordinarily entertaining.
But even there, you see Wootro's competence, her intelligence. I am doing something here. I'm not just being funny. And she's succeeding in it.
Yes, it serves a very competent and very specific purpose, despite being hilarious, which is really the best sign of her extreme competence, that even when she is being funny, she's still accomplishing her job. So we are getting close to our time. We're going to wrap up in a minute or two. Don't worry. I'm still going to answer those questions about words and apostrophes. We haven't forgotten that. But as we begin to wrap up, I want to sort of take a wider view, which is, there are so many character journeys and threads to return to and explore in Lesser Evil. And that's probably the big part why this is over 500 pages. We have Churi's development. We have the ongoing story of the Magus. We have Thalius and her promise to protect Thrawn. We have Zinda, formerly La Quinta, and her, the next step in her journey. Thurfian finally ascending to the heights of power he always dreamed of. All of these things and more are in Lesser Evil. All of them. Is there one in particular, either that I mentioned or even when I didn't, that you're especially excited for readers to get to see and explore, and why?
They're all different. I see this in many ways as an ensemble cast, Thrawn heading it, but the others have vital roles to play. They all have their own character arcs to complete, to their interactions with their own subordinates or their companions and such. I think the whole package is coming together. There's none in particular I'm especially going to point to. I think they all intermix until we get to the final climax and then the denouements at the end.
Makes sense. There's two that I'm just going to point out for readers that, again, it's very difficult to choose them. And there are some that I'm not going to mention because it would just be too spoilery to even mention them. But there is one scene that Arlani shares. There's one chapter where she shares a scene with another rather notable character. And I'm very much looking forward to readers getting to see that. It's a terrific little surprise. It was on my very first read of Lesser Evil. It was one of the things that really jumped out at me as like, oh, this is exactly what you want. And it plays out really well. And then secondly, I think it's very interesting to finally see, Thurfian is one of those characters who's like, they have this desire for position and power. What happens when you finally get everything you want? And sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's not, and there's always some level of unexpected with what you thought you were going to get when you finally get those things you so much desire. And I think finally getting to see all of that play out is really satisfying. And I think you
get a different perspective when you're in that position.
Yes.
I have ultimate power over my family. How do I properly use it to protect my family?
Exactly.
A lot of those questions are not as easy as they sound.
No, it's not only are they not as easy as they sound, but now you even have to wonder, now that I have this additional power and I have this additional knowledge, was I even asking the right questions before?
Yes.
Or do I want to ask different questions now? And it's really, it's exciting to see. Man, it's really hard to talk about this book and not to spoil things for people. But I think we did a pretty good job. We went basically an hour without letting anything loose. So as we wrap the things up, I have to first answer the two questions. Do you want to guess, Tim, how many apostrophes are in your trilogy?
Oh boy.
See, someone in the chat got close.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm going to guess 20,000. That's low.
It's actually more. That's a little high. So there are 16,088 apostrophes across all three books. So I saw a whole bunch of good guesses. Shout out to Raid and to Ava, who had guesses that were pretty close. There's just under 5,000 in Chaos Rising. There's just over 4,500 in Greater Good, and there are 6,600 and change in Lesser Evil. Obviously, being the longest book, it's probably have the most. And then as for how many words, the final number of words that we ended up with Lesser Evil, the number is 173,700. That's give or take a couple hundred words, because when you pull words from final printed books and stuff and pull that, you get some noise in the number. But it's around 173,000. It's one of the longest Star Wars books ever written.
I think I turned in 167,000 words. Then we added that one scene and did some more tweaking.
Yes. So that puts it near the longest Star Wars books ever written by word count, which is always the number you should use, folks, if you're counting up how long a book is. If you can have access to the word count, it's more accurate than the page count. By the way, Tim, you've written the longest Star Wars book ever. At Spectre of the Past is over 212.
No, Vision of the Future.
Sorry, Vision of the Future. Excuse me.
The second book.
212,000, which is the longest one ever. So you have that distinction.
It's not a contest.
It is not a contest. It is not. But you know what? This is a book that needed to be 170,000 words plus, and I'm glad it was. And that means that folks get a big, luxurious, long read to guide them into, the weeks of November. So as we wrap up now, we're basically kind of done. It's two things. First of all, obviously, if you'd like to purchase a copy of the book, definitely use the button below. If you purchase a copy, you get a signed book plate. The book comes out in now 3 hours. Look at that. We took a whole hour away from you guys in terms of having to wait. It comes out in 3 hours, audiobook, ebook, hardcover, everywhere books are sold. The second thing, as we wrap this up, that I wanted to mention to folks is that I know that a lot of folks have been asking me about whether or not we're going to do a special edition of Lesser Evil. Because if everyone remembers, we did these fantastic, crazy, amazing editions for the first 2 books. Now, I can tell you that, yeah, we actually are going to be doing another one. And the reason that we haven't actually shared everything about it, though we're going to as soon as we can, is, there's a lot of shipping and supply chain issues. And before we actually announce anything and give you a date or anything like that, we want to make sure that we know for sure when we're going to have books for you. Because it's really complicated right now and really kind of crazy. So that's why I've held off. But I can tell you that if you stay tuned to social media for Out of Print or for Del Rey, we'll have all the news for that. I could tell you that Magali Villeneuve has put together some amazing art to finish things off. Hopefully like tousled, rumpled, kind of disheveled hair. If you're into that, I think you'll dig this. And I'll tell you that the colors red and gold kind of play heavily in the art. So that's just a little tease of something to look forward to. But like I said, we are going to do one of those. It's just taking a little longer than normal. And yeah, Tim, as we wrap this up, any sort of final words on the trilogy and wrapping up your second, I guess, official trilogy? But if we include the other 3 Thrawn, the Imperial trilogy, it's a trilogy of trilogies for you.
Yes. Yeah, my son suggested years ago we should make it 4 books, because then we've got a trilogy and a tetralogy and easier to keep track of. So put that in the hopper. It's been a fun ride. It's always an enjoyable journey to write Star Wars books. I would love to do more. We need to talk about what we want to do next.
There's always the nice thing, in part because we don't ever fill the map in completely, do we, Tim? That there's always more stories to tell and explain.
Yes.
And I'm sure that we are going to find another cool story to tell.
Well, as Yoda said later that afternoon, once you start down the Star Wars path, forever will it dominate your destiny.
That's right. And so with that, we're going to leave everyone. And I want to thank our friends at Mysterious Galaxy. I want to thank everyone for reading. We hope you enjoy the book. We hope you love it as much as we loved putting it together. And so I'll hand it back. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Thank you, Tom. Like Tom had said, if you haven't already, go ahead below and hit the purchase the book with signed book plate button. All the books are becoming with a lovely signed book plate from Timothy Zahn himself. Lastly, before we say adieu for tonight, Timothy, where can people follow you on social media?
Facebook.com/Timothy Zahn.
Facebook?
I can't respond to everything, but I do read everything.
Going to respond to every person that posts anything. Well, thank you so much, everyone who puts lovely questions. We hope you were able to get answered in one way or another. So many of you turned out. We are so blessed to have you tune in for such a great event. I hope you have a great night. See you for the next one. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.